Every time I come home, I come face to face with this rogues gallery. These photos of our forebears and children. I like these regular meetings. They're reassuring. Our parents and their parents were good people, and their wisdom and values have helped make us who we are. And I like to be reminded that our children have inherited those ideals too. Former Member of Parliament, Winnie Laban, finds that sense of receiving a raft of values from the people who came before her and offering it to the next generation especially important. When she had to make one of her hardest decisions, to vote in favour of the Prostitution Reform Bill, it was to those values that she turned, values of honest hope and a community in which every individual has dignity.
Mr. Speaker, I will vote to support the third reading of the reform of the Prostitution Bill.
That third speech was a very profound one for me, largely because I came into Parliament because I believe in giving a voice to marginalised groups. I believe in social justice, and prostitutes are human beings too, and they are entitled to the same protection as anyone else.
You voted against the bill in the first two readings.
Yes. If you look at the Pacific community, over 90% are Christian. My electorate is, though diverse, has a huge conservative element to it. We've got over 54 churches in Porirua alone. So I thought, well, I'll just go with the flow. And then before we had the third reading, I had a crisis of conscience. I thought I was really hypocritical.
It was a testing time.
A very testing time. And I mean, you get faxes, emails, people wanting to see you, pulling you from both sides of the issue. And I actually closed the door one night and I just stayed in a space of silence and I prayed and I thought about it, and I knew that at the end of the day, this was the position that I had to take.
Winnie, you're the first New Zealand generation of your family. Your parents came from Samoa. Why did they come to New Zealand?
They came from Samoa in the 1950s, and both actually had jobs in Samoa and were doing quite well, but they wanted to come to New Zealand to get married and have children, and they wanted us to have a good education, and I think it's the immigrant's dream. It's every immigrant's dream for their children to do well and to participate as equals in our society. So those values were very much behind my parents' courageous journey to leave family and home and supports to come to a country that was very foreign to them.
It's an amazing sacrifice, really, isn't it?
It is. And my brother said at our father's funeral that he remembers very late at night when we were asleep, Dad trying to practice his English with a candle. And many people can relate to those stories, and I think this desire to be accepted as an equal and to belong.
Education was obviously a really important thing. You went to local schools?
Well, we went to primary school and kindergarten in Wainuiomata, and then we went to intermediate school, and then I went to Wellington Girls for the third and fourth form, and then for the other 3 years I went to Erskine.
Right, it was a Roman Catholic school.
Roman Catholic, and my brother went to Scots, Presbyterian. They wanted us to experience an education where we could mix with children and people that we didn't grow up with in Wainuiomata, and to get the confidence of mixing and going to school with children from other backgrounds that I may not have ever met. I liked Erskine because I've always had a spiritual bent to me, and so I liked the spiritual dimension to
that beautiful
my school.
chapel there.
That's right, and I had a fabulous teacher called Mother Pabst, and she was German Kiwi. She was in her 70s, and she was the first woman in New Zealand to get a master's in law.
Oh.
And she's one of those fabulous educators that really made history alive for me. She impressed me because here was a woman who could have gone on and become a judge or owned her own legal firm, but she chose to work in a girls' school.
Wow.
And teach kids like me. Education for me is about opening doors. Education is a link to job, to a paid job. Education teaches you to create, to critique, and to appreciate and analyse life.
Hardly anybody spoke Samoan, let's face it. And you kids would be growing up speaking English, first of all. Did they encourage Samoan for you too?
Definitely, but there was this desire for us to do well in mainstream education in New Zealand, that it was important to learn English, it was important to write well in English, that to succeed here and to get the ticket, it's English. But yet, we picked up Samoan and, being spoken also at home. And they really wanted us to hold on to our cultural roots, but not only in terms of being a proud New Zealander, but the fact that we were Samoan as well.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to leave one part of you at home when you go to work or you live life, that this is what everyone receives, and this is what everyone can give. There was always this desire to do things for others, not in a patronising way, and so they were quite pioneers with Pasifika women. My mother was one of the pioneers that started that. Dad was the chair of the Samoan Advisory Council, and they started these groups of Pacific Advisory Council, very involved in the church and holding key positions there. There's a saying in Samoan that goes like this, e le taua le tofi, ai taua le whamaoni, which means it is not the status or the job that is important, it's your ability to work hard, to do well, and to serve others. And I think that underpins a lot of my parents' dreams for us to do so well, and we were brought up in a very loving family. I can't emphasise the importance of love. Strict,
Right.
but loving.
Yeah.
I actually went to Victoria University when I was 22. And I did the diploma in social work there. And when I came out, they encouraged us to go into mainstream jobs. So I was a senior social worker in social welfare many years ago. And I worked as a family therapist, and then I did my postgraduate in development.
By this time you'd met Peter,
That's right.
your husband.
Yeah.
How did you meet?
Well, we actually both met in social welfare. Peter was working in training, social work training, and I was on the community development team. And we fell in love and we got married.
When you left the public service, or were invited to leave the public service, you ended up working with him again.
Well, both Peter and I were made redundant. I cannot underestimate what it's like for people when they don't know where the next job's going to be, or when they can't get paid work. People have to survive. And so it was a very humbling time for us, because we'd worked most of our paid lives. So we thought, well, we'll take some time out and just see what opportunities are there. And then within 5 weeks, I was called by the Consumers International movement, who said, would you and Peter like to consider setting up the program in the South Pacific?
Oh, wow.
We agreed that Peter would administer it from home and that we would run the workshops around the whole region.
Right. Fantastic.
Yeah, well, we got to go to Melanesia, Papua New Guinea, Solomons, Vanuatu, and Micronesia, Palau, Federated States of Micronesia, and Polynesia, Cook Islands, Niue, Samoa, Tonga, Tuvalu as well. And we even got to run a workshop with Torres Strait Aboriginal people in Darwin.
So you're dealing with issues around consumerism and in contrast to sustainability?
That's right. The reality is that we're all part of a globalised world now, and third world countries and developing countries are not immune from it. And it's the constant challenge of, do I drink Coca-Cola or do I drink a coconut?
Yes.
if I can sort of sum it up.
Easy
well.
choice.
That's right. People want cars,
Yeah.
so they accept cheap cars from countries like Japan. And what they don't realise is, though it might be cheap to purchase, when it breaks down, where do you dispose of it? Do you grow your own vegetables, or do you buy frozen canned foods? And we live in a world where we're so busy that it's very tempting. You know, it's easier to spend money and just buy processed type foods. Then that's linked into high diabetes, obesity. So you can see all the interconnections around consumerism.
At the time, were you conscious of the dimension of spirituality that's involved in precisely those kinds of issues?
Definitely. And I remember going to meet Pa Telesio, who was head of the Catholic Church in Tonga. And I talked to him about consumerism. He said, what is consumerism, when he got to do with God sort of thing? And I said to him, well, what about the consumerism around Easter and Christmas? And I said, in some of our events like White Sunday, enormous amounts of money get spent on those events.
Doing the right thing.
That's right. And so, you know, there are those links. You know, that Jesus was born in a humble stable. He did not ride around in a Rolls Royce.
Obviously, you had a keen Pacific identity in New Zealand, but when you were exposed to the whole of the Pacific like that, was that reinforced for you?
Very much so. I'm very proud of being part of the Pacific with all its challenges.
Family is important for you. You haven't had children of your own.
No.
But you've got this wealth of family spreading all over the place.
That's right. Well, I've got a huge extended family. I would have loved to have birthed my own child, but it didn't happen.
Didn't happen, yeah.
But I do have this wonderful passion for children. One day when I went to a South-South dialogue in Brazil, there was a spiritualist, and he sort of put his hands over you and says what kind of person you are.
Yes.
And he goes, oh, Winnie, he goes, you have a wonderful gift for children. And I do.
That's true, isn't it? Yes.
And I think I just view all the children as my children.
Your own mother,
Yes.
who obviously was a huge influence on you, and she died really not so long ago now.
That's right.
That must have been a hard thing for you.
It was very, very hard for me. My mother was probably a much stronger personality than me, Chris. She felt I was very much like my father.
Right.
Soft. He wasn't soft all the time. I mean, she was interesting because she got a business scholarship when she came from Samoa. And she was one of the first women managers in the public sector. She was in charge of the shorthand typing pool at Social Welfare and Housing New Zealand. She was the first Pacific woman EEO person,
Right.
coordinator for the public sector. And she used to read the shortwave news on radio. And so every night in Samoa for 30 years, I mean once a week, the families would gather around after prayers and listen to the little radio, the transistor radio, of the news. And so Mum used to translate the news, world news, into Samoan, and also what was happening to the Samoan community here.
So your family in Samoa would get to hear your mother reading them the news.
That's
and
right.
telling them about the Samoan community.
All over Samoa.
What a fantastic
All
thing
over
that
Samoa. She had a heart operation 2 weeks before I gave my maiden speech in Parliament. And she died of congestive heart failure just before Christmas. And I think that was one of the toughest things for me, because Mum is a fighter, and Mum kept me very strong to my values.
How do you respond to the reality of death?
Well, at a personal level, when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I knew that this could be it, and I really reacted with shock and disbelief. But I've found it really, really hard. Much as I may be seen as a strong woman, I have found it, I've questioned my faith, I've questioned God, where people are suffering, or when death actually occurs. I go, where is God? Why isn't God here? What is it, God, that this child is dying, or that my mother has died, or my father has died?
It's the cry from the cross, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a huge, deep sense of pain, and then I understand that life is physical at one level. And there's a saying in Samoan that goes, and I'll only use the English, inside us our dead. Our dead are the proud robes our souls wear. We are the manifestations of our ancestors, and life goes on through our children and children's children.
That's very special.
Yeah.
Actually, that's very special.
Yeah.
When you had the diagnosis,
Yes.
it did challenge you pretty heavily.
Oh, it did. It did. It's the disbelief, and you don't hear. And then I thought, gosh, suddenly, all your plans. You know, we can plan our superannuation and 10, 20, but we may not be around for it. And, you know, the present is the future.
Yeah.
You know, that it's important to try and live out your dreams while you're still there to do it. But I thought, well, I've got to soldier on, and I made it very public.
You did. I know that was something that gave a lot of people a lot of hope and confidence.
Yeah.
You made a very visible, positive display.
Yeah, that's right, because cancer doesn't discriminate. And I know that Pacific women, the numbers who go to have mammograms is very small.
Right.
And I thought this is probably an opportunity to come out and encourage women to go for mammograms, because they're not the most comfortable to have. And I felt, as a Member of Parliament and as a Minister at the time of Pacific Island Affairs and the community and voluntary sector, which I was very proud of, that I have got cancer and that we can battle all of this together.
Where did you get the strength from to sustain you during, this period?
Yeah, I got my strength from all my friends, all the people who I've never met, who wrote cards and sent messages, from my family, and I got my strength from God, because you do visit that inner part of you. I do pray in the quietest moments and understand and know that I can have that conversation with God and my mum and dad and my ancestors.
Do you reflect at all about whether there is anything after death?
I like to think that beyond the physical death, that we're all together, that I'm back with my grandparents and my great-grandparents and my mum and my dad and all the people that I've loved that have gone. There's a saying in Samoan that goes, it says that envy the moon, it comes and goes, but we mere mortals on this earth have only genealogy and memories and stories to share.
You've actually got quite a strong, if you like, spiritual whakapapa, we might say here. What would you say in Samoan?
In Samoan it's called ngafa.
Ngafa.
Yes.
That's something you've been conscious of throughout your life?
Yeah. We were brought up in a family that went to church every Sunday. I taught Sunday school. I was a youth leader, choir leader, and I became an elder at 19.
you toyed with studying theology and training for the ministry at one stage.
I did. I think I've always had a strong faith, and it's been challenged in terms of what that means. But I did think about, and probably would have gone to theological college if I didn't get into Parliament.
Right.
I did consider it earlier, but I became a chief.
Right.
A high chief in 1992 in Samoa.
Right. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I got called basically from the family in the village, my mother's village, to come and be a high chief. They're called Lua Manoval, and the title means two birds in a forest.
Ah.
The title's a very ancient one, and it was held by a woman many years ago, and I remember the joy in my mother's face, and I think my father was thinking more about how much money's going to go on this occasion. But the thing is that for me it was a recognition more in terms of my parents there, and accepting that meant that there was quite a responsibility and leadership role in relation to the families, to the village, but to the community as well. And you're called to come and serve. So, and they don't like to mix it.
So you were condemned in a way to politics because you couldn't enter the higher calling of ministry.
Well, it's funny because, being a minister, getting into Parliament and then becoming a minister is quite funny in terms of the language of it all. Yeah. But for me, the same values that I would have liked to study theology are the same values that I've took with me into politics. I've always mixed ecumenically, and so I was part of the first group of women's interfaith. And the reason why I'm interested in interfaith is not so much the journey of us going beyond a textbook to experience and understand other religions. That's very, very important. But I like to see interfaith as a movement of social justice, that we confront the extremes,
right,
that we support minority religions, that no system is immune from abuse, and that within New Zealand we've had the courage to stand tall on the world stage against apartheid, against nuclear weapons. Why can't we do that in terms of standing tall and against extremes of fundamentalism in all its forms? And Kiwis can do it, Pacific people can do it, so why not interfaith?
E ngā iwi o te motu, te tangata whenua, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
When did you first get approached to stand for Parliament?
Yeah, when I was 44, it was a life-changing event for me, Chris. I grew up in Wainui. There was a factory called Kempson's that used to be Brugger's, and they used to do little springs for cars. Mm-hmm. So Pākehā, Pacific, Māori, men mainly, women worked there. And my uncle called me one morning, and this was when National were in and the Employment Contracts Act was in, and asked me to come. He sounded really upset and distressed. And when I arrived at that factory, I saw all these people crying. They were arrived at work that morning, they were told at lunchtime the factory was closing. No redundancy, no protection for the workers, and how were they going to feed their families that night? And for me it was quite prophetic. That was when I decided I'm going political. I'm not going to support this. Where is New Zealand going? This is not New Zealand values at all. And that's when I decided that I'll put my hand up.
Our nation needs a new politics of honesty, hope and healing, a politics that brings our communities and nation together so all New Zealanders can fully participate and live a life of dignity. That is what I came to Parliament for. That is what I stand for. I do not stand alone.
I got onto the Employment Relations Select Committee, and I moved the closure motion to repeal the Employment Contracts Act and bring in the Employment Relations Act, which is much more Kiwi. It's not about adversarial confrontation. It's actually about people, the unions, the employers, the employees, sitting around the table and trying to work out a solution around pay or whatever. We can do that. We don't need to be fighting each other all the time.
It's interesting you say that, because Parliament itself is characterised, perhaps caricatured sometimes, as being two sides standing opposite each other and throwing things and shouting at each other. Yeah. That's not been your style.
No, well, I think it goes back to upbringing and where you come from. You know, for me to insult you at a personal level is to insult all those sacred ancestors that you come from, that you're not an individual, that you represent all those families and ancestors. So there are cultural collisions in Parliament, and you can see with some of the Māori and Pacific how they don't really attack.
Yeah.
Because culturally, to attack somebody personally is not done. People forget the privilege and the humility that goes with being elected, and that your job is to serve and to honour the people who put you in there. And I think it's those things that at the end of the day are the tests.
Why did you leave in the end, Winnie?
I felt I was losing spirit. Much as I loved the work and the people side of it, I'd been doing it for 11 years, and I thought that I would like a change. And so Peter saw the job in the Dominion Post. He said, "Oh, I think you could do this job." Real Kiwi, eh?
Winnie, you have made a career of being the first at things, most notably the first Pacific woman to be an MP in New Zealand and to be a government minister in New Zealand. And we are delighted to welcome you to Victoria to continue blazing new trails as Victoria's first and New Zealand's first Assistant Vice Chancellor Pasifika.
It was about doing something seriously about young Pacific people in education, trying to increase staff at the university. In 2026, 10% of the New Zealand population will be Pacific. That's a demographic that are young and brown. We have to do something seriously about education with them. And we've got some shining examples, but we've got to increase those numbers. If we don't get them raising their heights or vision with education and what is possible, our economy's in trouble.
Now you're here and my cup is overflowing. Tanks full, you're driving, and I know we're going home.
Winnie, you've spent all your working life in a service role, one way or another. How important is it to be able to celebrate life, to enjoy your family and friends?
I love to dance and party. It's important that we make time to eat together, sing together, dance, and to love.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.